Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head on UATV and I'm Alice Gerjuk. The relations between the West and Russia are at the lowest level in decades. Western media headlines even mention the term Cold War 2.0 and explain potentially this can be as menacing as the first Cold War. The diplomats say conflict now can be even more dangerous because no clear rules exist to discuss the relations between Russia and the Western countries. We are joined in the studio today by Maksym Iali. He is an expert on international relations and senior research fellow of the Institute of World History of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Hello and thank you for being with us today, Mr. Iali. So first of all, after the poisoning of ex-Russian double agent Sergei Skripal, G7 countries demand that Russia disclose all the data on Novichok, nerve agent program, and G7 countries agree in holding Russia responsible for the attack. How, in your opinion, this situation can develop now?
First of all, I suppose that Russia will not agree.
Of course, it disagrees.
It goes without saying, I suppose, judging from how the situation has been developed until now, and their own versions, I would say, as you know, they cannot agree with their fault, though now the evidence are almost obvious. So I guess the next step will be new sanctions, first of all from Great Britain, and then I suppose taking into account that now evidence really, I would say, undeniable, right? Other Western countries will join them.
How do you think? What sanctions could Great Britain impose on Russia?
Well, actually, I suppose even judging from the statements of Theresa May and other members of government, it will concern the finances occupied, or not occupied, just accumulated, right, in GB. Also, as you know, there was now an estimation, I would say, of the assets of Russian oligarchs, and in case they cannot give proofs for which money, the origin of money, I would say, these assets also can be frozen.
Okay. Well, also, after the Kremlin list, Nikki Haley, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, has announced imposing additional sanctions on Russia too. And in several hours, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, said that this was misstatement. So he's kind of reluctant in this. What can this mean?
Well, I guess it just proves, it's another proof, I would say, that Donald Trump likes to change his mind. Because I read this night American press about this case, Wall Street Journal, big article about analyzing this situation, and it is said that Nikki Haley is not the person who can just say from herself. She always consultates and asks Donald Trump before going to the air, to the press, all the statements. So I suppose Donald Trump decided that not to, I would say, how I'm trying to pick the right word, that after last airstrike to Syria, it would be too much. Because
so
as you know, even after airstrike, he mentioned that he still entertains a hope to have good relationships with Russian Federation.
But these airstrikes in Syria, they do not influence Russia. They are not they're not harmful for Russia, I mean.
Well, because it is obvious that the consultations took place before the airstrike. I mean, between militaries of both states, and even President of France, Emmanuel Macron, before the airstrike, mentioned that Russian objects, so the strikes will take place on the objects where there are no Russian representatives. So it was actually for experts obvious that this strike will not harm Russian Federation. Because, as you know, in other case, if to analyze even statements of the top officials of Russia, there could be strike back, which could launch
that would impose a bigger
war,
threat
right.
worldwide. Okay, but after these alleged chemical attack in Syria and these airstrikes on the facilities that were producing these chemical weapons, there was UN Security Council. And the
one.
latest, yeah, not one, and there were some tensions, of course, between the representatives of the United States and Russia, and these tensions were very palpable. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, took a rough stance against Russia, and also a Russian representative replied with accusations. So, did the American representative get enough international support on the last session of the UN Security Council?
Well, as you know, Russia has a veto.
Veto right, right?
Veto right. So no matter how much of support U.S. representative has in UN, right? No resolutions can be adopted if Russia does not agree. Moreover, I saw not air an episode, right, of that session between of the UN Security Council, and before it started, how Nikki Haley came up to representative of Russian Federation, greeted him very positively. So we should also take into account that what we watch and what really happens in reality behind the curtains, right? There is a big gap, I would say.
So we don't know many things. Okay, but you mentioned Russian veto privilege. Is it possible to deprive the Federation of this right, of this veto privilege in the UN Security Council? Because Russia already used veto power 12 times to block any resolution initiatives according to Syria.
No, actually, under modern conditions, I don't see any possibility if until, I would say, US or UN Security Council will be reformed. But now there is no such right. So everybody says, a lot of countries, that UN Security Council needs to be reformed. And as you know, the last strike on Syria also took place without resolution of the United Nations. So it was also violation of international law, to put it mildly. So I guess last crisis in Syria, after this chemical attack, proved one more time that United Nations and UN Security Council is in crisis and should be reformed.
How can it be reformed?
Well, that's, you know, I would say it could take a lot of time to discuss this topic, but I mean, now, as you know, what is the problem, right? That none of the countries should put a veto. So if to deprive such right of the constant members of Security Council, this after reform, that's the solution. Yes, if the majority of the members of the constant members of Security Council approve this or that resolutions, even if one or two states does not disagree with
the general opinion, right?
Yeah, right. That's the only possible option.
maybe there are some other aspects that should be reformed also, or this is the general one that is preventing.
I would say this is the key one.
The key one,
right? But a lot of things in UN should be reformed because, as you know, it was established in 1945. A lot of time took place, and things changed in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of Russia, for many countries, now it looks as the main threat for safety and security, well, at least for the United Kingdom, taking into account the quote of their Minister of Foreign Affairs, Boris Johnson. And now European countries develop such a rhetoric that now they do realize what Ukraine has been fighting with for all these years, and now it seems that they would need to learn from Ukraine's experience. Taking such statement into account, could we expect stronger support from Europe and for Ukraine's efforts to end the war in the east of Ukraine?
Well, it's, difficult to say, to answer, I would say, in 2-3 statements, because, our war with Russia already for 4 years has been taking place, right? And until then, if to recall, if to come, switch back, right, to 2014, after annexation of Crimea, the EU, also even US, President Obama at that time, only declared strong concerns about it, right? Even after so-called Russian Spring was launched in Donbass. The same, none of serious sanctions took place, and only after MH17 Boeing, right, was shut down, only after that, because a lot of citizens of EU died there, suffered, US and EU imposed serious sanctions which really hurt Russian economy and stopped Russian aggression in Donbass. So I guess, again, this Skripal's case could be second, as I call it, black swan after MH17, I mean, for Russian Federation, after which common West, I mean, US and EU,
is getting unified against Russia.
Unify and impose stronger sanctions.
Okay. Well, now Ukrainian Interior Minister Arsen Avakov is paying a visit in Washington for discussion countering Russian hybrid threats and strengthening cooperation with the United States. And he meets with the representative of the U.S. State Department, also with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In your opinion, did he go there to teach or to get taught?
I guess none of these variants. I guess he came there to represent himself, to negotiate, right? Because, I mean, of course, to share experience, to take some advice, new knowledge about cooperation, etc., etc. But also, I guess, it is connected with coming elections 2019, I mean presidential elections. So to represent himself, not of course as a potential candidate, because as we know he doesn't have strong support among population, but I would say as a guarantee for these elections and pro-Western candidate, I would say, to win, to be a supporter of this process.
Okay, well, thank you for this conversation. That was Maksym Iali, expert on international relations. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I'm Oles Gerjuk. Goodbye.